Alberto Gonzales. We're so pleased to have here today. You all know him as the 80th Attorney General of the United States. Before that, he was the White House counsel in the Bush administration for a number of years. He also was the Secretary of State of Texas and served on the Texas Supreme Court for a full 6-year term. And we're pleased to have him here today to talk about not only the Trump proceedings as they're going, but how that huge national story impacts crime coverage, criminal justice coverage at a local level, how it impacts people's trust in the system, issues such as cameras in the courtroom. I mean, things that happen at a local level that are now being debated at a national level. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Kevin. And thank you all. And as a reminder, this is what happened is said on stage is on the record. If anyone needs to file something, you can quote from this and all of our other sessions moving forward. So thank you all.
Well, great. And thank you for getting up at this early hour and joining us here. We are honored to have the AG with us this morning. I don't think he realized he was going to have to undress a bit to get the microphone on, but we got him mic'd up. So hopefully, if you have trouble hearing, raise your paw and we'll get to you. I want to start by saying I think that we could all agree that the term unprecedented is vastly overused in our reporting today. Not so much, though, when it comes to the former President Donald Trump and the criminal cases lodged against him. They're not confined to the state and federal jurisdictions where they're filed. The repercussions in the form of threats against public officials who have refused to support the lie of election fraud have washed into virtually every community across the country and onto the shores of your beats as criminal justice reporters, editors, news directors. As I said, we are honored to have Alberto Gonzales, a former Attorney General of the United States, for this discussion on the looming challenges for our criminal justice system and our larger democracy in the face of these prosecutions. A few ground rules before we start. I'll begin the discussion up here, but we'd like to make this a free-flowing discussion, and we'll go to your questions when you get tired of me. And we also are working with the proviso that I promised Judge Gonzales that we would try to get him out of here as close to 9:30 as we possibly can so that he can make a next event in Florida. But be honest, wouldn't you rather be in D.C. managing all of this stuff again?
The good old days.
Okay. Well, let's just start. For the first time in American history, a president faces not just one criminal trial, but 4, involving 91 felony counts. And it's hard to imagine saying that at any other time. I guess first off, in your view, how will the criminal justice system be tested during this period that obviously coincides with an election in 2024?
Yeah, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm not sure that I've always been terribly fond of the press and its coverage. Certainly during my tenure as Attorney General, we were engaged in certain controversial issues that sometimes I worried about the coverage because I think oftentimes when you're talking about national security issues or ongoing criminal investigations, there's only so much that you can say during that period of time, and so I think it's frustrating, the interaction between the Department of Justice and the media for that very reason.
We felt that too.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the stress on the criminal justice system, the current investigations and trials, I think the stress, I have confidence in the criminal justice system and in the rule of law. It's one of the great things about our country. But it is only so great as the individuals who are involved in the decision-making and in the work of the criminal justice system. And I'm hopeful. I am by nature very optimistic, but I'm hopeful that people at the Department of Justice and state and local investigators and prosecutors are going to just simply do their job. And I know it's hard to ignore the fact that the defendant is a former president, but the truth of the matter is that's what you do. We try to instill folks at the Department of Justice in terms of the investigation and prosecution that it is nonetheless, if it's a former president, nonetheless that person is still a subject of an investigation, subject of a prosecution, and we treat it as normally as we can. And we have to, because it is about treating everybody the same. Obviously, because it is a former president, there are other issues relating to security and things of that matter. But nonetheless, I believe and I hope that, at least at the Department of Justice, it'll be business as usual. And there will be criticism, particularly from President Trump, about the way the department is doing its job. But there's always criticism. No matter, even when you're doing the right thing, you're going to be criticized as an investigator or as a prosecutor. And so you just try to do your job. And if I were speaking, if you all were Department of Justice employees, that's the message that I would say. I would say, you want to help me? Do your job. You want to help the American people? Do your job. It doesn't matter that it's the former president.
Obviously, this is all occurring against the backdrop of persistent attacks on the credibility of key institutions that make up the justice system and democracy at large. You said you had confidence in the system, but do you think the system is adequately prepared in the face of these attacks against investigators, judges, and even election officials?
Well, it's going to, I think the threats against investigators and judges and election officials is different in terms of the scope. There's no question about it. And it means paying more attention to the security of these individuals. But when you sign up to do these jobs, quite frankly, that is part of the job. Probably less so with respect to election officials. Certainly when I was Secretary of State of Texas and in charge of elections, I didn't really worry too much about my home being protested and things like that. But yeah, I do think that it may require additional resources. It's going to require people to be more careful, be more diligent, be more sensitive to the surroundings or environment. But I have confidence in the system. I think it will prevail. Donald Trump has a great deal of experience in our legal system. He's been the subject of numerous actions, both civil. Obviously, we've got more criminal actions in this particular case. So he knows how to use the system, I think. And so I think that both state, local, and federal prosecutors, investigators, they just have to be smart, prepared, and be determined. This is going to be a long process. And it should be a long process. I mean, sometimes I was asked as AG, how long is this going to take? It will take as long as it needs to take. And as soon as people are ready to go, in terms of an investigation and a prosecution, then it goes. And that's what drives those decisions, not so much when an election is going to happen or other events around the world or in this country, but when the investigation is complete, when the prosecution team is ready to go, that's when it goes.
For reporters and editors, news directors gathered in this room, the environment has raised the stakes for everybody and how they, I would assume, how they cover this in their own communities. What's your sense of the risk at play? You just mentioned, obviously, you were Secretary of State in Texas at another time. You've seen the testimony of January 6th Committee of election workers who were volunteers. What is your sense, though, of the risk as you observe today?
I'd have to acknowledge the risk is greater, honestly. If I were an investigator, if I was a state official, let's say a Secretary of State, or even as Attorney General, I mean the risk is greater. I think it's more likely that there'll be some kind of violence or protest. Certainly a great deal more public agitation about the work that you're doing. The truth of the matter is, one of the things people ask me about whether or not, isn't this really just all political? Aren't these investigations and prosecutions simply because of the fact that Donald Trump is running for re-election? And the answer to that, to me, based on what I see and observe, is absolutely not. In fact, I think Merrick Garland and I think Joe Biden wish he wasn't running for president. I think given the actions that I've observed, he would be prosecuted. He would be investigated whether he was running for president or not. And that's the way it should be in this country. If you engage in criminal wrongdoing, there should be an investigation and there should be a prosecution if the prosecutors believe that there's enough evidence to have a successful prosecution. So I think that the fact that he's running for president, I think is something that complicates things, no question about it. Certainly, as I said, I think for President Biden and for Merrick Garland, they would prefer that he not be running for president as the prosecution goes forward and the investigations go forward. But the fact that he is should not insulate him from investigation or prosecution if in fact he has engaged in criminal wrongdoing.
I think the next issue, sort of looking at it more broadly, is probably an issue that you all have had to contend with in your own communities. And that is whether this environment of intimidation, threatens to deter people from entering public service, either as a volunteer or an elected official. I mean, Ann recited your long list of service, and I understand now you're trying to bring a baseball team to Nashville. We won't get into that right now, but
please do.
But do you think this environment threatens that sense of public service in the United States, which obviously is a bedrock?
I think it probably will be discouraging to some, and I think we have an obligation. I mean, if I were talking to my sons, for example, about if they had expressed an interest in perhaps doing something in government or politics, we'd have a very candid discussion about the state of things today. But we need good, principled, courageous individuals to serve. That's what makes the system work. And so the notion that we cannot achieve that because of concerns about safety and threats, well, the answer to that is not to have good people not participate. The answer is, let's make sure we put in place those things that will protect these individuals and that will encourage them to get involved.
As journalists gathered here, we have a central obligation to explain what is at stake. As somebody who has observed in the firing line before, do you think, from what you see now, that the media has done enough to gain the public trust to fulfill that obligation?
Well, certainly,
Especially at this time.
I think the media, let me just begin by saying, I think the media is a very, very important institution in our country in terms of informing the public about what's going on. And that trust in the media is damaged from time to time when there is incorrect reporting. Talking to a group of participants earlier about the fact that there is such pressure today to be first in reporting an event. And that pressure sometimes can lead to reporting that is incomplete and inaccurate. And when that happens, that damages trust in the media. It certainly damages trust in an institution like the Department of Justice. If you write a story that is first, but is inaccurate or incomplete, then I might not be, as Attorney General, I might hesitate in doing another interview with that individual. There are, as someone in the position of a cabinet secretary, or someone who deals with the press a lot, you do develop, I don't want to say favorites, but you do begin to know fairly quickly, okay, who is going to get it right? Who is going to be respectful? Who is going to be accurate in terms of reporting? And so, you find yourselves more available to respond to questions from someone like that than someone who doesn't do a very good job and not very accurate. I'm not talking about reporting mistakes that I made. I mean, if you make a mistake in these positions, that's fair game for reporting. But to be inaccurate, to be unprofessional, I think hurts the media.
Related to that, somewhat, cameras have been banned in federal courts since 1946. But we've had a previous discussion about this, where you previously indicated that the broadcast of federal prosecutions involving the former president deserve some serious consideration. Given the questions raised about the credibility of the press and the justice institutions in general, how important is it for the public to see for themselves how these prosecutions will unfurl?
I am, as a rule, against cameras in the courtroom because it changes people's behavior, in my judgment. And I know that at the state level, prosecutions, trials are often televised, and so the public can see it. This is a decision to be made by the Chief Justice presently. Congress hasn't weighed in on this. But on this particular case, this would be a case where I think that an exception might be wise, because the former president has made it clear that to his supporters that all this is a witch hunt and that he cannot get a fair trial. It's all been rigged, and he's going to be found guilty of what he's been charged with. And I think it would be useful to have the American public have direct access to the proceedings. On the other hand, I also know, again,
It's okay. You don't have to go there.
on the other hand, this is an individual who uses that to his benefit in terms of controlling the message. And I think that he would take full advantage of that opportunity. So I have mixed feelings about it. If people do not have confidence in our criminal justice system, do not have confidence in the way that these trials that would be run, then that would be a very good reason why to have these things televised.
He's made, I'm referring to the former president, no secret of his intent to exact retribution for his failed re-election effort if he retains the White House. What consequences could the Justice Department, and again the larger criminal justice system that we report on, face given the administration's previous attempts to co-opt the system?
Well, I mean, are you talking about a newly elected President Trump? Well, based solely on what his rhetoric, things that he has said publicly, I would worry about what might happen. I would worry about who he would appoint as Attorney General. Now, the Senate would have an obligation to make sure that this is someone that would be fair to everyone, who would protect the rule of law. But nonetheless, some of the rhetoric that former President Trump has said to me is dangerous. And I would worry about retribution and going after political enemies with no basis at all. That would be of some concern to me. As I spoke earlier to some people in the audience, when people ask me what is the most important quality that I believe is necessary for an effective president, to me it's integrity. This is the most powerful office in the world, and I want that power constrained by something like the Constitution, by the rule of law, by personal integrity, that the office and that power will not be used for personal political gain. because it is such a powerful position. And so that power has to be constrained by something. And I worry that we may elect someone to office that is not constrained.
He has referred to the hundreds of people who've been prosecuted and are now serving either jail sentences or other punishments for the Capitol attack as hostages. He's also signaled that he would consider, maybe not consider, but indicated his intent to pardon them. How much damage would that do to the system that you once presided over?
I think it would do serious damage. Let's just take one part of that, the pardon power. You know, it is virtually unrestrained in the Constitution, virtually unlimited. It's got to be a criminal offense, and it's got to be a crime that's actually committed. But beyond that, the president has the power to pardon people for federal offenses. From my perspective, it really is a slap at the face, a slap at our criminal justice system, a slap at the Department of Justice, a slap at normal citizens. I mean, these folks have been tried in our criminal justice system. They've been found guilty of committing a crime at the Capitol, and to say in advance, without even knowing the particular circumstances of the individual cases, that they're hostages and that they were prosecuted unfairly, to me undermines the rule of law and is damaging.
What message also does it send to the communities where these folks have come from? Many in jurisdictions where you all work. What's the message to local officials there where these folks have come from?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit more on the question?
Yeah. Does a pardon or a presidential action sort of give free rein to people or sanction action like that has an impact on how the local systems work?
Yes, I think it does, and it may encourage such similar actions in the future, quite frankly, to the extent that this president, if he's elected, or other presidents, the notion that if you do this, you will be pardoned, or if you've done this on my behalf, you will be pardoned, even though you've been criminally tried and found guilty. And I think that sends a terrible message. So this discussion this morning has been a lot about Trump, and obviously he enjoys a great deal of support in this country. But he hasn't been found guilty of anything, and so it's important to remember that in our system under the rule of law, he's entitled to the defense, his own defense. It's one thing to be found responsible by a congressional committee, but in terms of criminal wrongdoing, he hasn't been found guilty, and so it's very important to emphasize that, I think, in reporting about Donald Trump. He's like all of us as American citizens, enjoys certain rights. And so even though I've expressed concern about the attacks on our institution, on the rule of law this morning, I just want to emphasize the fact that as an American citizen, particularly one who's running for president, running for office under the First Amendment, he's allowed to do and say a lot. That's part of our system. We can be critical about it, obviously can be critical about it, and that's what I think I've indicated some criticism this morning. But he has a right also to speak. But when that speech, the concern that I have is when that speech is such that people are hurt, then I get very worried about it. When that speech is such that it undermines, I think, a great institution like the Department of Justice, then I get mad. I really do. Because Over 99% of the people that work at the Department of Justice are career employees. Typically, they don't care who the president is. They don't care who the Attorney General is. They go to work day in and day out to serve the American public. And so some of the rhetoric undermines their work. And I think that's unfair. I really do.
What made you mad? Everything that you've observed, either through January 6th hearings?
Kevin, there is so much. I mean, am I worried? Yes, I'm worried. I am worried. But we'll see what happens. And again, as I said before, it's one thing to talk about, to say something, and in campaigns, things are often said, promises made, perhaps even threats sometimes, but it's not the same as action, although the wise men say, pay attention to what someone says, because that is who they are, and that is what they do, or will do.
General Honore, who is a familiar
Yes, I know.
here in New Orleans, was quoted recently in the Post just a couple of days ago regarding his concern for another January 6th-like event in the United States, given the rhetoric and the environment that we discussed earlier. Do you believe that such an event could happen again, if not at the Capitol, somewhere in our country?
Sure, it could happen. How likely is it? I don't know. I must tell you, I remember January 6th, I was shocked at what I saw. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it could happen in this country. And I'm sure that our friends and allies around the world who observed what happened on January 6th were equally stunned and sickened by what they saw. This was not the United States of America. Could it happen again? Perhaps at state capitals? Yeah, I guess it could happen again. I hope it doesn't, quite honestly. But yeah, I have some current concerns that it might happen.
I'm going to stop my blabbering here and open it up to questions from the audience.
I think everyone's depressed right now, Kevin.
I'm glad we started off on a good note. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. Dan Shelley, president of RTDNA. General Gonzales, two questions on semi-related topics, but not really. First of all, do you still support current DOJ guidelines that prevent prosecutions of sitting presidents? And number two, would you support a bill currently in Congress called the Press Act, which essentially is a federal shield law protecting journalists from government prosecution for failing to reveal the identities of confidential sources?
Okay, with respect to the second question, I think I would support a shield. I think the media has a job to do, and I would extend the protection. I think that is something that I would support. And the first question again was? Do
you still support the DOJ guidelines that prohibit prosecuting a sitting U.S. president?
I do. And the reason for that is the president has to make some of the most controversial, difficult decisions possible. And one thing the president doesn't need is concern that you may have a wacky prosecutor somewhere who decides, well, I'm going to prosecute what the president has done here. And so I think that is important. If the president engages in wrongdoing, I think the framers intended that president would first be impeached, and then when the president is no longer in office, then the president gets prosecuted. I think that's the way that our framers intended this to work with respect to a president who engages in wrongdoing.
I was wondering, you had mentioned that it was important to prosecute former President Trump as anyone would be prosecuted in America. Then you had mentioned that it's important also possibly to have cameras in the courtroom because of who he is. Should we be treating him like a citizen or treating him like a former president?
There would be well, he's both, right? It's unescapable. I mean, he is both a former president and he is a citizen. But that is sort of the tension that I feel about cameras in the courtroom, in that he would be treated differently. And I think it opens the door. I think once that door is open, I think you're going to see cameras in the courtroom. And for that may be the strongest reason why the trial will not be televised, for that very reason. You make an exception here, well, what's the next exception, et cetera. So I wish it were so that more civics was taught in school, and people today, I think, are so uneducated, at least from previous generations, about the way our government works and about what the Constitution says. And it's something that I encounter in law students, about the Constitution, for example. So there is ignorance, there's a lack of knowledge about the way our system works, and in a way, watching the federal trial would be educational for the American public generally. But I guess for now, and maybe probably for the foreseeable future, they'll just have to learn it in books and in watching state and local prosecutions, I guess.
Hi, Bobby Patra from Joplin, Missouri. I'm the news director of the TV stations there. You said that you trust the system as a whole, but what do you do about a president who continually thumbs his nose at the system and stacks the deck in favor of his wishes and his means, as opposed to what the general population thinks it is?
Well, are you talking about a sitting president or a former president?
President Donald Trump. As president, he stacked the deck. And that laws were created to change voting regulations across the country to push the system in a direction. How do you trust the system if lawmakers rig the system?
Well,
You're talking about redistricting and.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the justice system in general.
yeah, but we have to remember that the people that do say redistricting, how did they get that power? It's the citizens, it's the people. I think what you see in Washington reflects where the country is, but the country was there first, and then through the election process, then they put people into power. And so one could argue that reflects the will of the people. If the people are unhappy about what our legislators are doing, the answer is vote them out of office. And I know it's difficult. The power of incumbency is extremely powerful. It's strong in this country. But it is true that if the people are unhappy with a decision by a lawmaker, then they can make a change. But I think what we're seeing is perhaps that reflects where America is today. We may not like it, but that's the way our system works. People make decisions about who they want to represent them in office. I do say one of the most disappointing things that I learned from my time in office is how powerful it is. Power is seductive. People do not want to give up power in Washington. And they care more about their next election than about the next generation. It's all about maintaining control and maintaining power. It's what I've observed. Now, and I'm not condemning everyone in office in Washington, but I worry that too few people feel more concerned about maintaining power. If we're unhappy with that, we could make a change. And we don't. And the only reason I can think of is either because we're ignorant, we don't care, or that's what we want.
Catherine Reed from Unfiltered with Kieran. So if Trump is found criminally liable after the trial and everything, does that compromise the appointments he made while he was in office? because he's found criminally liable, that compromises his integrity. Does that compromise the integrity of maybe federal judges he appointed? There are a lot of times where...
Let me just stop. I would say no. No, I wouldn't say that their integrity is compromised. You also, because there is a check in that they've been confirmed by the Senate. And part of the job of the Senate is to evaluate not only their education, their experience, but also their integrity. And so, I think that would be my first defense if I was under attack as a sitting judge appointed by President Trump, former President Trump, is that, well, I was confirmed. And that's the check that the framers intended.
Well, I ask because sometimes I'll hear attorneys say, oh, well, this judge was appointed by Trump. I know I don't have a chance in heck to possibly win this case.
Yeah, I don't buy into that. The fact that there are Obama judges, there are Bush judges, there are Trump judges. For me, it means that's who appointed them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to decide a case a particular way. What is true, every president has a view about how a judge, a Supreme Court justice in particular, should interpret the Constitution, how a federal judge should interpret statutes. So they all have their way of thinking about what is the appropriate judicial philosophy about a federal judge. Early in the Bush administration, during the transition, President Bush told me that one of the things he really cared about was Supreme Court appointments, and he expected me to, working with the Attorney General, to tell him, okay, what is the philosophy of this particular person that we're looking at to put on the Supreme Court? Because that would be very, very important to him. So I would get away from saying this is a Bush judge, this is a Trump judge. Brett Kavanaugh, I hired Brett Kavanaugh in the counsel's office. He worked for me. I know Brett's integrity. Neil Gorsuch, he was sort of a junior staffer at the Department of Justice when I was the Attorney General. He was at my morning staff meetings. I know him. Of course, John Roberts, Sam Alito, we placed on the court. So I know these individuals pretty well. I have confidence in them. Do I always agree with their rulings? Absolutely not. But I'm not on court. And so we're going to have differences of opinion. But for the most part, I have confidence certainly in those individuals. The fact that I'm not saying anything positive about the others doesn't mean that I feel differently. It's just that I don't know them well enough from my perspective. But the Senate, doing its job, hopefully, has verified to the American people that these are individuals qualified by virtue of education, temperament, experience, to be on the nation's highest court.
Chris Joseph with Fox 8 here in the city. A lot was made during that congressional investigation into January 6th about who he wanted to put in office, threats about resignations. You think there's still the willpower among that 99% that you're talking about in the DOJ to resist Donald Trump if he is elected again and whoever he might put in as AG?
I think there is great political risk to the Attorney General and to the President of the United States when investigations and prosecutions become politicized because of the fact you have so many, because of the composition of the Department of Justice. There's no way that remains hidden. It becomes public. What will happen is that someone will come to someone in the media to say, this is what's going on in the Department of Justice, it's wrong, and you need to publicize it. So you take a chance when an investigation or prosecution is engaged for political reasons because it will become public. And it does serve as a check normally. Maybe it doesn't serve the same kind of check on former President Trump, but certainly one of the things that's always been an effective check on the actions of the President of the United States is the media. The president, most presidents, normal presidents, care about how history will record their service. And and particularly during a first term, if there's a possibility of a second term, they're going to worry about press coverage. And so I think the media is an effective check on the exercise of power.
Emily Goodell, Apple Valley News Now from Yakima, Washington. You mentioned earlier the difficulty in building a trusting relationship with reporters. In your most successful relationships with reporters, what did they do that really made you trust them?
They reported what I said accurately. That's always a good first start, honestly. Always respectful and civil, and occasionally we might have a disagreement in our conversation, but as always respectful and civil. And if I said something, okay, it's on the record, off the record, that was always respected. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can think of anything else, but I know reporters have a job to do. And I respected that. I tried to respect that. And the truth of the matter is, the message that I believe is necessary to be communicated, I could not do that without the media. So from my perspective, the media was in essence sort of a partner in terms of pushing out information to the American public about the work of the Department of Justice, about the work of the administration. And so that's the way I try to approach the media. And I think as a general matter, I kind of alluded to the fact that maybe conflicts, but that had to do more with some of the issues that was affecting the Department of Justice, and perhaps some of the issues affecting some of the decisions I made when I was White House counsel, that then translated to, that became an issue when I became Attorney General, than it did with respect to personalities with the reporter.
Hi, I'm Grayson Gordon with Local 3 News in Chattanooga.
Chattanooga.
Yes. Going off of that question, just about those relationships with reporters and different news stations, what is the best way for either a news station or reporter or anybody who's going to be talking with you directly to approach that relationship and also kind of build up that relationship?
Well, of course, I wouldn't field calls directly from the media about wanting an interview. There is at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 people that worked at the Department of Justice whose job was to set up interviews. And so I think having a good relationship with that person, quite frankly, would be critical. That person would develop their own views and opinions about the professionalism of a particular reporter, and the expectation was that they would always inform me of when there was a request for an interview of some type or a comment, and what I would do is expect that my person to tell me their opinion. Okay, is this something do you think I should do or not? So establishing that relationship is vitally important. Not every official has such a person in place, but I think most do, and I think. I don't want to say schmoozing with that person is important, but developing a relationship, I think, is very important in having access. Because even if I don't do the interview, I might nevertheless be willing to provide some kind of quote or response to a question, and that is sometimes would be enough for the media person.
Can I just jump in on that question? How much were you frustrated in that job?
Yeah.
When you felt like, I need to say something, and you were counseled not to?
It's frustrating in that the work oftentimes involved national security matters or ongoing investigations, and we simply can't talk about it. Even if it involved me personally, couldn't talk about it. If it's an ongoing investigation, I just couldn't talk about it. And that can be frustrating. But at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's not about the office holder. It's about the institution. It's about the presidency when I was the Attorney General. Always be mindful of the fact that I'm just one person, and I represent the Department of Justice, all 130,000 people. And so how I act, how I answer a question reflects not just on me, it reflects on everyone in the Department of Justice. It reflects on the President of the United States. And that's a big deal. And honestly, how I perform my job being a Hispanic, the first Hispanic to be Attorney General, did I worry about, okay, yeah, I worried about doing a good job. Because I want more Hispanic AGs and more Hispanics in key positions of influence in this country. I think that is important personally. And so, yeah, you always worry about doing the very best job you can.
Rick Erbach, WGNO News, here in New Orleans, sir. What is your proudest moment when you headed the Justice Department in the war on crime across the country?
We had a program, Project Safe Neighborhood, going after predators, sexual predators on the internet. I was most proud of that. Becky, my wife, who's here with me, was a volunteer there with, Becky, what was the name of the organization? The National Center for Missing Children. And I was most proud of that, quite frankly. The ability to work on that project and helping parents get closure on what happened to their missing child.
Tex Milanovic, Arizona's family. We work, as a border state, Arizona. There's a lot of federal investigations that if the feds are involved, pretty much we don't hear anything. I think a lot of folks who work in local jurisdictions, we're not dealing with DC, we're dealing with our local U.S. Attorney.
Right.
Is there a reason why they're just basically non-responsive? Even when a case is adjudicated, you can't get them to talk, you can't get any info. What strategy, I guess, or what tips would you give us to working with the local district attorneys and U.S. attorneys?
Well, I think the U.S. attorney is going to be limited by sort of a uniform set of rules established at Main Justice. Every U.S. attorney first has to abide by the law enforcement priorities of the White House, then the law enforcement priorities of the Attorney General, then you get to the law enforcement priorities of that U.S. attorney. Okay, and so with respect to dealing with the media and access to information, a lot of that's going to be governed by what Main Justice says in Washington, D.C. Again, as I said, if you're talking about an ongoing investigation, there's just going to be limits on what can be said, and that will never change, quite frankly. Trying to establish a relationship with the person who handles media in the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to be critical, but you all know that. I mean, that's where it starts, quite frankly, and hopefully that person will be able to at least tell you why you cannot get information. Does that person tell you that? Is there a person in the office?
There's a media affairs contact.
Yes, there's a media affairs contact, and so when you ask a question, I'm sure the usual answer is, it's an ongoing investigation, we can't comment on that right now.
A link to PACER, that's about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, you don't want to say something that's going to compromise an investigation. You don't want to also say something that hurts someone's reputation, who ultimately may be found to be, if not guilty, at least there's not enough evidence there to move forward with the prosecution. So I know it's frustrating, but from my perspective, there are legitimate reasons why you want to be careful about information that is reported to the press. And the truth of the matter is, I suspect you all have your own sources within organizations where you get information sometimes. And Lord knows with social media, I mean, there are a number of sources of information. But from my perspective, I think there are legitimate reasons to hold on to information. Maybe not as long as we do today, particularly about classification of information. There is so much information that is classified. There are too many people that have authority to classify information, and it remains classified way too long. And I think that is something that does need to change, quite frankly.
I believe we have time for one more question.
My name's Heather. I'm with Local 3 News in Chattanooga as well. So do you have advice for, on the local level, that the district attorney has blatantly told us she doesn't like us and will not tell us things? That she tells other stations.
Doesn't sound like a smart district. This is elected district?
Yes, this is elected district attorney. is there advice to repair that relationship or other venues to go about to get information from other, like, as a former attorney
Well,
general?
Not really.
You're fired.
You know, it's odd that she would say that. It's a she, right? It's odd to me that she would say that. I'm not sure. I think having a good relationship with the media is always a good thing, at least a neutral relationship. So I find this somewhat interesting. It's an interesting strategy. Maybe she thinks that the media is held in such low regard by voters in that area that it makes sense to go after the media. But I think having a good, I'm assuming the district attorney has a media person, right?
Yes, a bail bondsman.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can help you. I don't know.
We just have numerous cases where she will tell the other two stations information and will refuse to reply to our responses at all and so we can't get anywhere.
Well, there's some, something has happened then to damage that relationship. Something happened or someone did something that made her mad, maybe something personal in her family or her life. I keep trying is what I would say. Keep trying.
Please join me in a round of applause for our panel this morning.